That was good.
Mr. President, fellows, it's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Bernard Smith, and his subject is the oldest air force in the world. Bernard was called up in 1943 into the Fleet Air Arm and served as his training was a telegraphy air gunner. And he had quite an exciting time doing that. After the war, when he was demobbed, he went into photography and opened a shop in Collier Road. So he's a local man, and I'll say no more and hand you over to Bernard. Would you please welcome Bernard?
Because I'm a bit deaf. So my wife is always telling me to be quiet. Very nice, and a nice little couple of people to talk to get going. Now I'm going to look at the time and see if I can finish within half an hour. Now normally it takes an hour and a half, my talk, and I've got it down to just a few numbers. So off we go. Right, now you notice that I've got a jacket on here with a few bits and pieces on it. Now this badge here is the Telegraphist Air Gunners Association. It stopped last year because most of the people are dead. The squadron I was in, out in the North Pacific, there's only 2 of us left. And there were 20 aircraft there. So that'll give you an idea of how many telegraphist air gunners are all dead, except me and my mate. So that's what that's all about. Now the next one is this little aircraft here, the Swordfish, known as the string bag. And you know what it was like, of course. If you looked at the pictures, you'll see what it's like. And it's a very old-fashioned looking aircraft. And my son took it along to school to show the teacher, because she said, would you bring pictures of aircraft from the last war? And she brought that along, and they said, no, we want the last war, not the first one. And she didn't know, of course, that the Swordfish sunk more enemy aircraft, enemy shipping than any other aircraft throughout the war. And that's what it did. It sunk, for instance, half the Italian fleet in one go. And I'll mention that in a minute. The next little thing, as we go along, is this wartime badge here, which means that I was in the war. And I might tell you, if you have got them, the box they came in is wonderful. Anyway, the next thing on the list is a little badge just here, and I'm very proud of that because it's blood donors badge. And out of all the blood donors, in 100 blood donors, less than 100, 1 in 100 get to 100. And I got to 112, so I wasn't bad, was I? And I started in Canada because they thought it looked nice for the local inhabitants. So we went along 3 times. The next one is the Indefatigable tie. Now you think with a name like Indefatigable, that would sink enemy ships without anything else, wouldn't you? But there you are. And just underneath is all the details. Dio Adjuvanti. There's not room for it in there. And if you people, any of you did Latin, of course, I didn't do Latin. I went to the intermediate school in Romford, which isn't there now. It's gone. Anyway, if you live at the back end of the ship, that's where the officers are. It's with the help of God. And if you live at the front end of the ship, where the ordinary seamen are, it means God help us. Now, the next one, I'm missing that because we haven't got room for half an hour. So let's get rid of it. Number 4. Number 6, I have to look at this because I've got a dreadful memory. In 1908, the Admiralty told the Bright brothers that aeroplanes would be no use for the Royal Navy. And this is a little bit of interest. In 1909, the Admiral started the first air force in the world, the Fleet Air Arm. And you can imagine, typical of our naval admirals, they called the first thing the mayfly. It was it was just called the mayfly, and they thought it did, but in fact someone left it out in the open, and a storm came along and broke it in half, so it never did. In 1916, and this is history of course, the oldest air force in the world, Jutland aircraft were used for spotting. Not much good as it turned out, as the Indefatigable blew up, didn't it? Luckily, it wasn't mine. 1917, landing on ships at sea. The pilot had 2 goes and killed himself on the second go. So it wasn't very good after all, was it?
Great comedy.
1918, HMS Argus, the first aircraft carrier, made by the Royal Navy, which is a bit of a miracle, isn't it? And then, in 1937 to 38, there was a special do out in the North Sea, and a mate of mine was there, and he was a telegraphist air gunner doing spotting from the battleships. And when it was all finished, the admiral in charge, and I think he was on the wrong side, said, "You can take your toys home now." And a little bit later, of course, a couple of battleships were sunk off Burma. The first enemy aircraft shot down in the Second World War was shot down by a skewer. The Fleet Air Arm shot it down. So it shows you the Fleet Air Arm did a little bit of good, didn't it? In 1940, the Swordfish, with no air gunners on board, sunk half the Italian fleet at Taranto. 1941, the Bismarck was slowed down by Swordfish. But my mate was in one which hit it the first time and mucked up one of the fuel tanks and slowed it down. He died about 3 years ago, so I'm afraid I couldn't bring him along. HMS Raleigh was the first camp I went to in January 1943. And if you want to go there, it's still there. And it's in a little place called Pennycumquick. And if you know the area at all, you know that the idea of Pennycumquick is because that is the way across the ferry. And that's when Pennycumquick was about right, wasn't it? There were about 30 in each hut, and I was in one of the huts with a special name on the top, which I've forgotten at the moment, so I can't tell you. It's gone for the moment. When we got kitted out, I had the smallest pair of pants that they issued, 38-inch waist, and I was 28 inches at the time. I took it home and it fitted my father beautifully. He'd been in the First World War, of course, as a regular. The greatcoats, or overcoats as it's known in the Navy, the only difference between that and anything else was the amount it came from the ground. They had a stick and they held it against you, and if it came the death distance from the ground, it fitted you. It was so big that I put the buttons across and I couldn't put my hands in this pocket because it was right across the pocket just here. And it shows you what it fitted like. 3 years that. It was all right in the North Pacific, mind you, so that was okay. That's the HMS Raleigh, of course. You always wanted to be fit, didn't you? So the idea had to be that you had a route march every week. So on Sunday, we all fell in, and we had a little church service, and we all marched out for the route march. And I still remember it, out the front camp, turn left, about a quarter of a mile down the road, turned left again into the next road, and when we all got there he said, right, stop, get your cigarettes out, and we stayed there for an hour. And when the route march was over, we marched back. Is there anyone in the army here?
Yes.
Oh, that's a bit of luck. Because if you remind me at the finish, I'll tell you what happened to a friend of mine who was in the army, which is even worse than our route march. Anyway, let me put my glasses back on. We're only up to number 13, so we're well, the next one, of course, we were very good. We were all little poems for all these different things. Very good at marching. So we were picked for a Wings for Victory parade. And I can't remember where it was. We went by train, but I can't remember where it was now, so it don't really matter anyway, does it? But the main thing about it is that there's a little poem about it. And it says, the army will fall in columns of 4. The RAF will fall in columns of 3, and the Navy will fall in 2 mobs, taking their time by the wardroom clock. So that's about right, isn't it? We went behind the Marines with our band, and as we got to the end where they were going to stop and listen to the speeches, our chap said, no, carry on. So we carried straight on, went through a little hole in the buildings there, and he said, right, put your guns down, 2 of you look after them, in the cafe. So we stayed there until our chap said, the Marines are coming back. So we fell in and went back home again. So that was all right, wasn't it? Just about right, that was. Oh, and incidentally, of course, in Canada, and I'll tell you a little bit about Canada in a minute, girls were around. And in fact, if I look in my book, I find that several telegraphist air gunners married people in Canada, in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, so it was quite good. And there was a little poem there, which you may have heard. Into the woods, no, no, into the woods, no, no, into the woods. I'll tell the vicar, I am the vicar. My mother's not going to get it. Your mother's not going to get it either. And I've forgotten the next bit. Anyway, luckily I've forgotten the next bit, as you're all decent people. There's all sorts of things like this, you know. It really, I'm on to number 15 now, so we're okay. Oh, by the way, has anyone been on holiday in Cornwall?
Yes.
You've all been on holiday. Well, you've all had a tidiogi, haven't you?
Yeah.
Oh, you all know what a tidiogi is?
Cornish pasty.
Cornish pasty, thank you very much. You're the first ones I've found who knew about it. And that's what we got issued for lunch. So that was all right, wasn't it? I missed that off at the beginning, you see. So, the next thing that happened was certain people had to go to the office. And about 25 of us went to the office, and they said, right, all you got jobs like being... What was your job? Electrics. Anything like that, please go away, because we don't want you. You're going to do your electrical stuff now, you see, or whatever. And left about 15 of us. So 15 of us went along to the sick bay, and when you think about it, these were all picked for the Navy, so they must have been reasonably well, mustn't they? Only 2 passed the exam. And mine had the biggest chest expansion the chap had ever seen. God knows why. Anyway, 2 of us passed it. And we were given a little form to fill in, and it said, fill in these little bits on the form. For instance, were you ever sick on buses or coaches? Well, we used to go on holiday every year, and if we went to someone like Bournemouth, they always used to stop halfway, and I used to get off and be sick every time. So I put no. Well, I didn't want to put yes, did I? Because I wanted to be a telegraphist air gunner. Anyway, the other chap said no. They put him up in an aeroplane, and when he got off, when they came back, he fell over and couldn't stand up. So I was the only one who passed. God knows why, but there you are. That's what happened. So, we're doing all right. We're only up to number 28, I think. So we're 14 already, and we've got another 15 minutes. Yeah, but I want to say something about these pictures. So I'll have to go about... Anyway, I went across to America in the Queen Mary with 16,000 other people. So it shows you it was quite crowded, wasn't it? So that was okay. So went to Canada, and a little bit in Canada, we went through the local railway down to the town, and we passed the local station, and it was 2 oil drums and a plank. And if you held your hand up, the train would stop and pick you up. But of course the train, when it got to Yarmouth, was okay, so that was all right. And there was a little poem there, which I'll tell you. Where are we? I've lost it. It's gone.
28.
Oh yes, when we got to the town, if you remember, all you older people know that chemists always had something outside, a thermometer. And this was a lovely day, right in the winter. And when we got there with the sun on the thermometer, it was roasting 7 degrees, 25 degrees of frost. So without the sun there, it must have been 35 or below freezing point. So it shows you what it was like at 5,000 feet. 2 to 5 degrees every 1,000 foot you go up. And there's a little notice there, which I can believe. It's all right, I can tell you this one. As cold as the end of an Eskimo's nose. As cold as the fringe on a polar bear's chin. You can tell it was Canada. As cold as charity. And that's pretty chilly, but not as cold as the bones of our Willie. He's dead, poor guy. Dead. I had 6 occasions when I could have been killed during the war. Only one of them wasn't due to the pilot. That's where the wheels didn't come down. Luckily they came down later, but we hit a petrol Bowser instead, so that was just bad. Went to America to swap across to another aircraft, and the pilot there ran out of petrol. Well, there was a little switch that said, so all the others. But they didn't bother to look, did they? So we landed in the field. And I've still got the chicken bone that someone gave us for lunch. Can't tell you much here. Back in the Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary, very posh in those days.
Been round that.
Went to Sydney.
Yeah, right, Arizona.
And then via HMS Slinger, down, or to Ceylon I should say, to where to? I can't remember now. Oh yes, to the Indefatigable. And I joined the Indefatigable, luckily, 2 days after we hit by a kamikaze. You know what a kamikaze was? I don't need to tell you that.
Ron knows about
that.
Toilet.
American liaison officer said that if it had been an American carrier, it would be 6 months back in America for repairs. But as it was a British carrier, it was sweepers man your brooms. And we were back in action in 43 minutes. So it wasn't bad at all, was it? Now, you've also seen some pictures of this. I haven't sorted them out, so it's going to be a bit awkward. You've all seen the photos? Yes. You've all seen them, so I won't bother to look at the photos. But you saw what it was like when a kamikaze hits. They tried to land and look down the funnel, but they missed it every time. Luckily, we only had 1. Some of the ships had 2 or 3, but none of them were out of action for very long, more than a couple of hours or so. So it wasn't bad at all, was it? 4-inch armour plate all over, and we had a little hole in the deck, or not a hole, but a dent in the deck about 4 inches deep, where the bomb had landed. We had a few people killed and so on. And we landed at this one, if you come and have a look over here, if there's room for you, there's some of the places I went to in the, where are we? It's got some bits and pieces here. Miyako and so on, in part of Japan. I did 17 operations altogether, so it wasn't too bad. But that wasn't bad at all. So, the next time, an ordinary carrier, if you look down on it, on that photo that you saw, the barriers are halfway across, and there are wires across like that, with a few crosses like this, as you went along. And then to stop you, you were very careful, there were 7 wires, and you made sure you tried to land on the 3rd one. If you try to land on the other ones, of course it'd be a bit of a nuisance because you'd run out of wires. And the 7th wire was known as the Jesus Christ wire. and if you missed the first one and hit the back end of the carrier, and there was a photograph somewhere there stuck in the back of a carrier, it doesn't move an inch. 7 ton of aircraft won't shift it. And it goes a bit, but the bloke in that, he died last year. He was our, looking after our money. God knows what's happened to the money. So, what's the next one? Oh yes, each end of the carrier, it goes round and down, each end. Surprisingly enough, it's called the round down. So that was all right, wasn't it? That was quite reasonable. Now, that wire, called the Jesus Christ wire, tell me when I've got to stop, by the way. One called the Jesus Christ wire. If you miss it, you go over the barriers. And there's a lovely one there. There's another one, and I can't find it. I've seen it. Showing you a running like this with the aeroplane over it. It's gone right over the top. I've missed him. Didn't kill anyone. But it goes right over the wire. And I was sitting aside looking at some carriers, some things carrying Seafires, which are ordinary Spitfires, specially made, and it came in and hit the barrier. And the wheels were taken by the undercarriage one, and the top one came over the top, went through the front of the aircraft and cut his head off. Oh, God. Water, blood everywhere. Now there's another one there as well, which shows an aircraft catching light. And he couldn't get anything from his petrol tank, so he had to land. And he didn't want to land with the tank on, so he tried to drop them off, and it fell off. And we're all standing there looking, watching him come. And we could see him come along with all the splashes coming out with the fire. And we ran. Well, there's a special thing in the Navy. There's stations. Stations for leaving harbour. You all go down to the flight deck, into the cable deck, and mess about with the Admiral. Oh, I'm getting in a mess here, aren't I? And you mess about with the anchor, and so on, which is very handy, of course, because you go back to sleep again. And then there's action stations where they all rush up and load the guns. We had 16 4.5s on board, a regiment of artillery. So it shows you there were 2,500 of us on board. And the last one, when we ran, seeing it come towards us, is panic stations. When in danger, run in doubt. God, I've forgotten it. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'll tell you in a minute. Well, we're nearly finished with this, so we're all right. No, I can't find it, but I'll tell you in a minute. Oh yeah, when in danger, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. And that's panic stations. So that's about right for you, isn't it? Now, interestingly enough, although I told you what our admirals were like, in fact, in one of the books we were issued, it shows you all about the sails in a ship. And I know what a ship is. A ship is a 3-masted vessel, square-rigged on all 3. But God knows why. and they did all those sort of things, but everything brand new from the Second World War and so on has all been put there by the Royal Navy. Steam catapults. If you wanted to get on without going into the wind, because the wind would help you to go off, you would get on the steam catapult and it would fling you off 60 miles an hour in 1.5 seconds. And you'd have your home like this, because as you went off, it'd push you that way and you hit your head there and bang you that way and it'd cut your hole. So you had to be careful. But 1.5 seconds, really very fast. The next one was the angled flight deck, which they've all got now, all Royal Navy. The mirror landing system, all Royal Navy. The ski jump ramp, and funnily enough we had one on board and they didn't realise where the angled deck was and so on, but there you are, they didn't think of it at the time. One here, if you've got time to have a look at, one of the trips, I don't remember where we went, you'll notice window in it. And I had window. Does anyone know what window is?
Yeah.
You do? That's right.
Microsoft.
Mixed up with radar from gunnery. So people wouldn't know. And I had to fling it out as you went along. So that was all right. And, oh yes, one of my mates, he's still around actually, one of my mates crash landed near the Whelp. And Jimmy the One on board the Whelp was Prince Philip. He was in charge of being Jimmy the One. That is, people looking after all deck people, not the captain himself. And anyway, he saw them at our 50th anniversary, went over to him and said, I was your shipmate for 2 or 3 days. So they had a little talk and he said, is that your wife over there? So bring her over and introduce her. So he brought her over and said, Prince Philip and so on, told him all about it. And Prince Philip said, I picked your husband up out the sea 50 years ago. Was it worth it? People say things about Philip, but he's a right old devil. There's no doubt about it. And ever since then, we've told the husband what the answer was. So it could be quite something terrific. Now, another one of my mates, he's just died a little while ago. He was the one in the aircraft that hit the Bismarck, and it hit it in one of the tanks where the oil was, and so it had to slow down. And he was in the aircraft that did that, so he got a little medal for it, didn't he? So he was okay. So that was all right. Number 25, nearly there. Oh yes, I was going to tell you about this chap who came along in a sea fire. Sea fire's ever so dangerous, you know. If you look in there, you'll see one place mentioned that sea fires, we had 7 in one day that crashed when it landed. And to give you an idea what it was like, when we made the first trip, this was in the ordinary one, off Japan. I've lost it again over there. That was a 2-month trip, and we lost 92% of our aircraft out of 4 ships. Aircraft crashing and landing all the time. But twice we had 7 sea fires land and crash. Oh, and I was telling you about something. Oh yes, this chap caught fire, so we came back and watched it burn. And you've seen the picture there. That's one that I took. And the chap got out, slipped on the wing, and landed in the petrol. And they put him out. But I took a picture of the aircraft, but I didn't take a picture of him burning, did I? Not very nice. Smells like burnt pork. There's some photos there, damage on my aircraft. Not me, thank God, but damage on my aircraft, so I'm all right. And then when the war finished, or nearly finished, we went out about 500 miles away from Japan, while they dropped the atom bombs. And they dropped the atom bombs, we came back and carried on bombing, and it took a week or two for them to finish it. And when it all finished, they decided that some of the Japanese didn't want to stop. So our American Admiral had a special message sent out to say that if any ex-enemy aircraft approach the fleet, they should be shot down in a friendly manner. We shot down about 6 or 8 as they came over the fleet after the war was over. And then our ships had gone back. They were ready to go into Japan, as we didn't, as it turned out, and we went into Tokyo Bay, and we stayed there for a few days and then back home. Just have a quick look here. Yes, one of those things where you hit the back end of the ship, if it's a bit rough, the ship goes up and down 20, 30, 40, 50 foot up. So it's quite difficult to land. But to give you an idea of what it's like to be a telegraphist air gunner, there were 2,000 of us in the war, and about 450 were killed during the war. And somewhere here, I've got the details, 138 of them were killed by the enemy, and 265 of them were killed by our people. Nearly all pilots. As I said, I had 6 occasions when I could have been killed, and every one of them, apart one, was done by our pilots. So it shows you what our pilots were like. It was a dreadful thing. It's a bit of a laugh now, man.
Not at the top.
No, nothing there. Anyway, I was going to tell you about the army. One of my mates, he was with me in my shop. He was in the army after the war, and he went to Aldershot. Now Aldershot, really tough, terrific discipline and so on. Or you'd think so, wouldn't you? But he said, one place in Aldershot, there's a little road that goes down a slight hill, and there's a T-junction at the bottom. And they had one of these things you have on railway stations with 3 wheels. So they used to get a chap on that and push him off. And he'd go down the hill and turn at the bottom. So that was lovely, wasn't it? So that was all right. And the hut at the bottom was the sergeant major. So they pushed him off one day, and they didn't know that there was a ladder in the road. And you can imagine, he got onto the ladder. Boom! You can imagine going like this all the way down the ladder, breaking it in half. But when he got to the bottom, he was shaking so much, he went straight through the hut and finished up looking at the sergeant major. So it shows you they're just as bad. A couple of other things. One of the things that's important, I've given this talk to a school. Do you actually want me to start?
No. Just finish the story.
Yeah, righto. And but be very careful with schools, because you don't want to tell them all these silly things, do you? But one of the main things you have to do, if you're being trained to kill people, you've got to learn it properly. Otherwise it can kill you, can't it? You're in real trouble. And one camp I went to, there was 100 of us, all grammar school children, and there I was with an intermediate school, and I came second, so it wasn't bad, was it? So there you are. Just a couple of little ones. There's one here which has a circle around it with lines. And the idea is that if you crash there, they will come and pick you up. We see the submarine going along to pick people up on the surface. And you would tell them where you were. Now, it was no good saying so many miles at a certain angle from wherever it was, else the Japs would find you, wouldn't they? So they used a special name for it. And the idea was that one of the words, for instance, was Yankee Lanky. And they reckon that Japs can't pronounce the L's, so they couldn't say Yankee, Yankee, could they? And another one was parallel bars, which was a bit awkward for the chaps. Oh, and in America, in Canada, we were in Nova Scotia. Now, you all know the Cajuns? From New Orleans?
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? They all came from Nova Scotia, because when they were there, because we chucked them out, didn't we? It was known as Acadia, and they are known as Cajuns. And that's why they're called Cajuns all that way away in the United States. So there you are. Let's see if I can find any more poems. I don't think there are any I can mention to you, because most of them you can get these actually from the library. I can't find it now, but you have to be careful. But they're very awkward, and some of them are disgusting. They really are. There's a little bit I've got here about. Oh yes, the last bit I couldn't remember. The mother's not going to get it. But I'm only 13. This is no time to be superstitious. Anyway, Sister Anna, of course, if you're interested, and so on. But that's it, I'm afraid.
Question.
If anyone of you know of any other organisation who could have my talk, especially do slides. I've got it at home, or your chap here has got it. My details.
I'll pass them on.
Yeah. If anyone's interested, I make a collection or whatever. That's what I usually do, make a collection, but it's up to you what you do. If I have a collection, I've got a little pot.
Right, another question.
Yes, I was going to ask, did you actually get to fly as a TAG on an American aircraft? Because with their undercarts, you could bounce 20 feet, but with a Seafire, you couldn't, could you?
No, that's right.
Did you ever fly
Seafires
one?
yeah, Avengers. Avengers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and I was going to show you a little thing here. If you take the end off, there's a little cutter. And if you're bitten by a snake, you cut your finger off.
You die.
Oops! I'll follow that cut.
What are you bitten on the bum?
I worked for years with a guy who was also in Swordfish at the beginning of war. And he was their gunner, whatever, at the back. And he always used to tell me that the story was that they had one gun, didn't you? Had a Vickers gun. And he had two radios, so when he ran out of ammunition, he could throw radios at the end. It was much more effective. Right?
Well, I don't know about Avengers, but you could there. We had 9 radio sets on board.
No, the Swordfish.
No, Swordfish only had the 2.
He had 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Swordfish is a bit of a trouble. I used to fire 3 bullets at a time, and my mate, when we were going together, he used to go bum bum, bum bum, bum bum. Which is surprising at 900 a minute, wouldn't you? It's surprising you can fire 3 at a time. Yes.
Am I right? Swordfish is one of his attributes. He could fly very slowly. Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, the idea was that
As if the wind was blowing like
and the enemy couldn't get their guns on it because they couldn't go that slow. The idea was that 95 knots in a dive.
I think we're going to have to call it a day then. Norman, would you like to be the one?
Well, I don't know how to follow that. I think we're really lucky to have you here today, actually. You're obviously very proud of all your badges, which you can quite rightly see why you are. I believe they're looking for someone for the comedy circuit. It's a very, very serious subject you're talking about, and the way you put comedy to it, make it light-hearted, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I am actually looking for someone for the cabaret for a race night, so if you're available, and you obviously had lots of fun as well as hard work and what have you. So I'd like all the chaps to obviously thank you for coming along and taking the time to share your experiences with us.
When I'm at home, I have my lunch and I go to sleep. And I thought, I'm going to be ever so tired when I finish here, but I was all right.
Everybody else awake as well.
Ron will shoot him down in a minute.
Were you going to say something about that for you? No?
No.
No? Okay.
Could cost you a bomb.
Well, I haven't laughed like that for a long time. Jeffrey has the menu for next week.
The starter is warm Thai prawn salad, followed by turkey and Stilton broccoli pie. If anyone doesn't eat turkey pie, please let me know.
What's the alternative?
The alternative is
He'll spell that for you. If you could do the apologies book, please, if you need to, and look at the website. There's some good stuff on there from Canterbury. If you'd like to be outstanding, please, for the final toast.